St David's Day last year, Prince William undertook his first official duties on a visit to Cardiff with his parents. Prince William is second in line to the throne and might be expected to succeed his father as King of Great Britain and Northern Ireland sometime perhaps in the third decade of the next century. But is his throne secure?
Asked me a year ago and I would have said yes, very secure. I'm not so certain now. It depends what happens over the next 5 years as to whether they get their act together more, whether they explain things to people better, whether they start behaving in a different manner. I would like to rethink and re-answer the question in 5 years.
While the Queen's popularity remains fairly constant, after her there could be trouble. I mean, après moi le déluge, in this case, translates to, after me, they're all a bit of a shower.
Faith and truth will bear unto you, our sovereign lady, Queen of the...
A whole range of factors have made the monarchy seem much less impregnable than when the Queen came to the throne. The enormous changes in Britain since then have meant that questions have increasingly arisen about the monarchy's position in a classless society, about its lifestyle, and about its finances. All these problems have come to a head with the public unravelling of the royal family. Throughout the century, the image of the British monarchy has been centred on its appeal as an idealised family. No one could fail to have noticed that in the Queen's 40th anniversary year, all this has been shattered. The marriage of the Duke and Duchess of York has broken up in full public view. And even more seriously, the Prince and Princess of Wales have appeared to be in a state of civil war.
There's scarcely anything that could be more damaging. The monarchy is about the family these days. The royal family is the phrase, and it's no coincidence it's the phrase that we use for the monarchy these days. It's not a political or a constitutional institution, very much more.
The sort of image of the royal family in the 1950s and 1960s, which the Queen managed to create, I mean, she really turned it in from being a royal family to being a kind of respectable upper middle class family that people could identify with. I think if it now becomes a collection of single parent mothers, of children from broken homes, of Hooray Henrys and Sloane Rangers, then I think that just undermines the purpose of having it. Why have it to see the worst aspects of family life? The other problem is not just the breakup, but is the manner of the breakup. I mean, the tabloids could not have made up the stories that surrounded the breakup. Indeed, tabloids don't need to make up stories about the royal family anymore, because what the royal family does is more ludicrous and bizarre than anything the tabloids could ever make up.
The result is that while the older generation remains popular and respected, there's a growing belief that the royal family's problems have gone so far that the long-term survival of the monarchy in Britain cannot be guaranteed.
I personally believe the monarchy is going to end with the death of the Queen. And I think that the youth of this country, who will be voters, and the majority of voters, will say goodbye, thank you and goodbye. I don't think that if there was a referendum on the death of the Queen, if that was in 20 years' time, the referendum would be anything but a yes vote to the end of the monarchy.
This belief is echoed in opinion polls. 2 years ago, a Mori poll showed that 3/4 of the population thought the British monarchy would still be in existence in 50 years' time. By June this year, the figure had fallen dramatically. Today, only 46% of the country believe that Britain will still be a monarchy in the middle of the next century. And more seriously, only half the country think that Britain would be worse off without a monarchy. This is a pretty gloomy prognosis for the sovereign. So is abolition a real possibility?
How do you get rid of a monarch? It's not easy. Last time they had to execute the monarch. Well, that's inconceivable. Just think of trying to get a bill through the House of Commons, any House of Commons, to abolish the monarchy and set up a republic. There would be room for no other legislation. It would dominate the issue for about 2 years. People's nerves would crack, absurd things would be said on both sides, the whole political system would be paralysed. No Prime Minister in his right mind is going to allow, or let alone introduce, a bill to turn the United Kingdom into a republic. The idea that the British monarchy is in any way in danger is quite delusory and utterly absurd. And I'm saying this at the moment when the tabloid press is inflamed to the point of fever by the travails, the personal travails of 1 or 2 members of the family. But just ask these people, if you think there's going to be an end to the British monarchy in your lifetime, how's it going to be done and who's going to do it? And the question evaporates.
So the continued existence of the monarchy is probably not in question. but what maybe is its position as a respected and significant institution.
I have no doubt that the monarchy is going to survive, but there is a real danger that it might survive on terms which would render it trivial and increasingly absurd, that the once great House of Windsor would become instead a kind of Monaco monarchy, which was just about scandal and frivolity and irrelevance. And there is a real danger that that is what might happen.
To avoid this possibility, it is necessary for the monarchy to reposition itself. To win respect, the younger members have to temper their behaviour so they become less interesting to the newspapers. The lifestyle of the monarchy has to become more low-key. The people who advise it need to be more in tune with the times, and the monarchy has to convince the population that it really has a useful and serious role to play in the life of the country. The starting point for any scheme to rescue the royal reputation has to be with its finances. Much of the anger over the Fergie scandal was focused on the belief that the royals were living it up at the public expense. Whilst the rest of the country is having to adapt to reduced circumstances, the monarchy is still seen to be living in a kind of 19th century opulence.
If they weren't living at public expense, rows like the recent Morton row would be very different. As long as they live at public expense, the British people has a right to probe into things that some people think they shouldn't probe into. They have to be held accountable for their behaviour, moral behaviour as well as public behaviour. If that dimension is removed, the insatiable prying into their private lives might be much more controllable than it is now.
Public opinion seems to be that the time has come for a more modest monarchy. A Mori poll in June showed that 3/4 of the population now think the royal family should not receive as much money as it does. Two reforms in particular have been widely canvassed. First, that the Queen should pay tax on her private income, and second, that the monarchy should be less of a family affair and more of a streamlined working institution, with fewer members receiving public money through the civil list. Last month, at the height of the royal marriage scandals, it was rumoured that the Queen had finally instructed her solicitors to make the arrangements for her to pay tax. But both the palace and the Inland Revenue have denied the story, and some royal critics believe the Queen will fight this every inch of the way.
For the last 40 years of the Queen's reign, she has resisted every endeavour of politicians, prime ministers, to disclose any detail of her private fortune, which has led to all kinds of speculation about it. I see no move on her part to start paying tax after 40 years, any impetus for her to pay tax, and the British public overwhelmingly want her to start paying income tax, would have to come from the Prime Minister, have to come from the Privy Councillors, have to come essentially from the great and the good in the land.
The civil list was fixed for 10 years in 1990. But now, even the monarchy's strongest supporters concede that it will almost certainly be cut back.
I think it might be one of the developments in the future that those who play a leading part in these events are very carefully selected and chosen. You might have a two-tier royal family, if such a distinction would be recognised by the media and the press. Those who are undertaking public duties and are there on the civil list, and those who rarely declare that they are private individuals and are treated in the same way as every other citizen.
To some extent, the royal family is already showing a lower public profile. In an earlier age, Lady Helen Windsor, the daughter of the Duke and Duchess of Kent, might have been expected to have had a very grand and public wedding. In fact, Lady Helen was married in the relative privacy of St George's Chapel, Windsor, the first royal wedding to have taken place there since 1919. Lady Helen is part of a trend of non-royal royals that includes most notably the children of Princess Anne and of Princess Margaret.
I think there's a mood inside the royal family, certainly amongst the junior members of the royal family, that they are no longer prepared to tolerate the kinds of pressures, the kinds of intrusions into their lives that they have to do at the moment. So there is a mood, and we've seen it with the Duchess of York. Whatever people think about her, she wasn't so bad as to be crucified in the way that she was. Now, she's left the royal family. Other members of the royal family, the junior ones, who could have been part of the function of it, just go their own way these days. They don't want to get caught up in that kind of malaise which seems to be affecting the royal family. And by the time we get through to, say, the year 2020, you will be back to Prince Charles, Princess Diana, if they're still together, Prince William and Prince Harry. That's happening inevitably.
If these trends continue, the monarchy of the future might look strikingly different. By the middle of the next century, it could be a much more limited outfit, with less confusion between its public ceremonial and private family sides, and with a clearer distinction between private residences like Balmoral and official ones like Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. And the trappings of an opulent lifestyle may be trimmed back too.
I doubt that they'll have a royal yacht, certainly not as expensive a one as now. I doubt that they'll have lots of aircraft and trains and so on and so forth. And I doubt that they will have the special status. They probably won't be the head of the Commonwealth. They probably won't be the head of state of many other countries, if any, around the world. So it'll be a very much streamlined, more European monarchy, doing a day-to-day job.
If all this were to come about, the British monarchy could look something like the Dutch. While Queen Elizabeth and Queen Beatrix both play the role of ceremonial head of state, their styles are actually markedly different. Queen Beatrix gets barely a tenth of the public money received by the House of Windsor, and popular respect for the Dutch monarchy has been achieved by a low-key and modest lifestyle, and a greater emphasis on informality than on grand ceremony.
I think the main difference, for example, is if you look at the birthdays of the Queen, you have your trooping the colour, it's terribly formal. The people come to the Queen, they see the Queen from behind crash barriers. Our Queen, when she has her official birthday, she goes to the people. This last birthday, she went to Rotterdam in the new vehicle, not in Rolls-Royce, not in a little helicopter. She went in the royal bus. It is a luxurious bus, but still it's a bus.